She was shivering outside on the street. He spent his last credit on her. Now she's sleeping in his arms. They said no one lasted more than a week in Calderon Hub's sub-levels, not without credits or implants or someone watching your back. Art and Vale had survived 36 nights. He didn't think of it as living. It was more like being slowly erased, one breath at a time. The air down here smelled of oxidized metal and burnt coolant. Vents coughed recycled gas that never fully warmed. Condensation froze where it fell, crusting along the steel tiles like frostbite on a corpse. Somewhere above, the commercial tiers pulsed with light, warmth, noise, life. Down here, lights stuttered from dying neon, and footsteps echoed like warnings. The silence wasn't peace, it was absence. Artan sat curled beside a rusting exhaust duct, his back aching from the cold. He pulled his thermal wrap tighter around his shoulders. It barely held heat anymore. The power filament inside flickered erratically, casting faint red glows across his fingers. The wrap had once been emergency rated. Now it was a memory of warmth. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His last real meal had been a broth cube softened over a pipe vent. Stolen technically, but the old man it had belonged to hadn't woken up to miss it. His gaze tracked the corridor absently. People moved like shadows, bundled in layers of cloth in desperation. No one met your eye. No one asked names. He used to hate that. Now it was safer. A clatter broke the monotony. A tin ration tray hit the floor and spun, dented. Artan didn't flinch, but then he saw her. She was slumped against the far wall, half hidden in the shadows beside a waste chute. Not just still, folded inward. Knees pulled up, arms cradling something swaddled in a linen cloth. Her skin was a soft, desaturated green, pale as mist, with veins of violet marbling that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. It wasn't a human shade, not close. Her hair was long and black, soaked and tangled, draping down her back like something forgotten by the stars. For a second, Artan thought she might be dead. Then he saw her fingers twitch. Her body trembled with a constant, ragged shiver, so violent it looked painful. But she made no sound, no plea. Not even a glance at the passers-by who avoided her like rot. He stared, and in that stillness, something shifted behind his ribs. A memory, not sharp, but vivid. That night on Delvin Prime, the refugee girl who'd sat silently on the edge of the observation platform, clutching the prototype empathy rig. She hadn't cried either, just held it against her chest like it could bring her brother back. He hadn't known what to say then either. He looked down at his palm. A credit chip, single unit, the last, enough for a cup of hot broth or a nutrient wrap. Something to dull the hunger cramps. But his body didn't move toward the food alcove. Instead he stood. His legs ached as he crossed the corridor. A few heads turned, not many. Down here nobody asked why someone was walking toward a stranger, but one voice called after him, sharp and mocking. "Don't waste it, gutter doc. She's already gone cold." Artan ignored it. The auto dispenser groaned as he approached, screen flickering between options. He selected emergency-grade thermal wrap, 1 credit. The machine hesitated, scanned the chip, and drained it in a soft blink of red. A sealed wrap slid into the tray, still warm to the touch. He turned back, the heat bleeding through his gloves, and walked toward her. She didn't stir, not even when he knelt beside her. "Hey," he said softly, voice rough from disuse. "This isn't much, but it might help." She twitched. Her shoulders pulled tighter, not in fear, more like muscle memory. He hesitated. Then slowly he unfolded the wrap and draped it around her. She flinched hard. Her eyes snapped open. Black, not pure void. There were delicate streaks of lavender branching outward like nebulae. No whites, no pupils, just depth and subtle motion, like a storm behind glass. She stared at him, and for a long moment, Artan forgot what he was supposed to say. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her fingers, thin, tremoring, closed slowly over the edge of the blanket. He exhaled carefully. "I don't want anything," he said. "Just don't freeze today." She stared. Then her eyes flicked downward, to his empty hands, the credit chip now gone. Her gaze lingered on the wrap. She said nothing, But something in her posture loosened. Not trust, not yet, but less resistance. Then she shifted, barely. Her knees lowered slightly, her chin tilted toward her chest, like sleep tried to pull her under, but couldn't quite reach her. Arton didn't move. He sat down beside her, cross-legged, resting his back against the wall. Close but not touching, just sharing the space, sharing the cold, sharing the silence. No words came. None were needed. The duct behind them hissed softly, its fan clicking like teeth on worn gears. A slow pulse of warm air flowed out. Weak but present, she didn't lean into it. She didn't lean into him. But she didn't pull away either. That was enough. From the other side of the corridor, someone laughed. A cruel, echoing sound swallowed quickly by distance. Arton didn't look up. When had he stopped thinking of people as people? Maybe it was tonight, or maybe it was the first time someone looked at him, shivering and silent, and saw a ghost. Either way, he was here now, and so was she. They were strangers, exiles, fractured pieces of lives buried by colder systems. But for now, under one emergency blanket, they didn't have to be alone. Arton Vale didn't remember falling asleep. He only remembered the moment right before it, the way her breathing had settled into a slow, rhythmic tremor, like a creature trying not to be heard. That sound had filled the silence between them, and somehow it had calmed him more than warmth ever could. Now a different sound replaced it, the low hum of sub-level maintenance systems winding up. Distant mechanical shutters, gears grinding behind the walls. The smell of thawed oil and recycled ammonia filled the duct, sharp and stale. Calderon Hub's idea of morning. He blinked against the dim light filtering through cracked panel seams. Cold air curled in from the corridor, like a slow fog. The emergency wrap had long since gone inert, its internal filament dead, but it still lay over her shoulders like a shroud. She was still beside him, awake now, eyes open, not staring at him, just staring. Her legs were pulled in tight, cloth bundle still clutched to her chest. The same linen from last night, frayed and stained, but handled with too much care to be just fabric. She held it like it had weight, meaning. He wanted to ask about it. He didn't. Instead, he pushed himself upright with a groan, joints stiff. A familiar ache pulsed behind his ribs. Hunger, worse than yesterday. He'd rationed that last credit longer than he should have. Starved in stretches, gambled on luck. It had bought her warmth instead of food. Now the cost was catching up. His stomach cramped as he straightened. She didn't look up. He stepped into the corridor, toward the refuse chute slot 20 meters down. A narrow service port half concealed behind a vented rail. It clicked open every rotation to dump nutrient waste from the upper decks. Most times it was a stream of expired paste tubes and rejected synth meat. Sometimes, if you were lucky, something edible came through. He pried the panel open. A rush of cold air slapped his face. His fingers worked fast, numb but precise. He reached in, digging past shards of plastic and congealed protein foam. Luck. A sealed packet of protein bark, slightly cracked but intact, and a compact tube of preserved fruit gel, minted for long-haul shuttle pilots. Probably expired, still edible. He returned to the alcove. She hadn't moved. But when he knelt beside her and set the packet down, she shifted slightly. Her gaze flicked to the items. Not greedy, not curious, just assessing. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but it's clean." No response. He didn't expect one. She stared at the food for several seconds. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she reached out. Her fingers trembled as she peeled open the seal. Not from cold, he realized. From hunger. The first bite was desperate. The second, too large. She choked, breath catching. Arton leaned forward instinctively. "Careful!" But her body snapped away from him, spine curving like a struck animal. She kept chewing, kept swallowing, never taking her eyes off him. He backed off, hands raised in quiet surrender. She finished the packet in silence, every bite fast but cautious, like she expected it to vanish or be taken away. When she was done, she wiped her mouth with the edge of her sleeve and turned slightly as if ashamed. He didn't speak. Instead, he leaned back against the opposite wall, knees drawn in. He bit off half the fruit gel and let it sit on his tongue. Sour. Artificial. Still, it felt like something. "There's a place I sometimes use," he said after a while. "Down the corridor, west side, behind the access shaft. The vent there leaks steady heat from the primary coolant line. Not much, but it's constant. Better than here." Still no answer, but her body had stopped recoiling. That counted. "I'll be there," he said, rising. He didn't expect her to follow. That wasn't the point. He crossed the corridor and found the old maintenance shaft tucked between two refuse nodes. One of the metal panels had buckled months ago, exposing a sliver of warm air that vented up from the hub's waste incinerator manifold. It reeked of ash and steel, but the temperature was survivable. Survivable mattered. He crouched down and cleared a spot, brushing aside brittle packaging strips and dust. Then he sat, hands in his lap, exhaling slowly. Behind him, bare feet on cold metal. He looked up. She was standing just outside the alcove, wrapped in the now cooled emergency blanket like a faded royal shroud. Her eyes weren't on him. They were on the narrow space beside him, where the warm air leaked up. He shifted to the side. She knelt. Not beside him. Yet. Across. She curled in tight again, arms around the cloth bundle. Her hair hung low, still damp at the ends, tips clinging to her collarbone. Artan didn't press. He just sat. The air between them grew warmer, slowly. The duct hummed. Minutes passed. Neither spoke. Then, her knees moved slightly. The blanket slid down an inch. She inched forward so that her back caught a little more of the heat. The duct gave a low hiss, a faint mechanical sigh. Her voice, when it came, was cracked, raw from disuse. "You gave me your last credit." Artan froze. He turned his head to look at her. Her eyes were still on the wall. Not him. "Yes," he said quietly. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because you reminded me of someone. Because I haven't forgiven myself for what I built. Because no one should die alone. Because the world shouldn't get to decide who lives like this." But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, "Because I saw myself in your eyes." A pause. "And I didn't want either of us to disappear." Her fingers clenched around the cloth in her arms. Then slowly, she extended one hand and broke the protein bar in two. She placed half of it on the floor beside him. Her eyes never met his. He picked it up without a word. They ate together in silence. Not comfortably, not yet, but no longer alone. And in a place like this, that was more than most ever got. The warmth didn't last long. It never did in Caldron Hub's underlevels. The ventilation hiss faded to a dull whisper, and with it, the illusion of safety thinned like breath on glass. But Artan didn't move. Across from him, the alien woman, still unnamed, still unreadable, sat curled in her blanket. The half of the protein bar she'd offered him was gone, but her hands remained clasped around the linen bundle she kept tucked close to her chest. He didn't need to ask what it was. Not yet. Whatever was in that cloth, or what it symbolized, was the last fragile tether she still believed in. The way she held it was sacred, like memory made flesh. He remembered that kind of holding, the way his colleague Tira had gripped the broken neural rig after the trial collapsed. How her fingers dug into the glass-like panel as if she could will the disaster to rewind, to unbuild itself, to spare the comatose minds they'd failed. That was the last time Artan had touched a rig, or let anyone trust him with something living. The woman shifted slightly enough to break his spiral of thought, her legs tucked beneath her, adjusting her posture. But she didn't look at him. Not directly. Her head was turned just enough that he could see the faint lavender branching across her temple. Vascular, but not quite. More like bioluminescent ink, traced into her skin by design or by birthright. It pulsed gently when she breathed, like a light remembering it used to shine brighter. He didn't realize he was staring until her eyes flicked up, locking on him for a moment. "I'm not going to ask questions you don't want to answer," he said, voice low and rasped. "But if you want to talk, I'll listen." She didn't blink. The silence between them stretched, not hostile, just frayed. Then, without warning, she set the bundle down beside her, pulling her knees closer to her chest. Her arms crossed over them, chin resting just above. Her gaze didn't leave the bundle for long. "It was a boy," she said quietly. The words struck harder than he expected. Her voice was different now. Not hollow or frightened, but rusted. Used poorly, or not at all, for far too long. Each syllable came like a stone breaking the surface of still water. Born too early. 3 days, she continued. He died before I could name him. Arden's breath caught. He didn't interrupt. Didn't offer the standard reflexive comforts. He knew better. Some wounds didn't want soothing. They wanted witness. He didn't cry, she said. Just faded, like he knew he wasn't supposed to be here. She didn't sound angry. She didn't cry. Her tone was clinical, like the pain had burned so hot for so long that it had calcified into something beyond grief. When they threw me off the freighter, I still had the wrap, she added. They didn't notice. Artan felt a pressure in his chest that had nothing to do with hunger or cold. I'm sorry, he said. Not because it was expected, because he meant it. She nodded once, barely, and leaned her shoulder against the wall behind her. It's warm here, she murmured. He blinked. That was the closest thing to comfort he'd heard from her. It's the manifold line, he replied. Waste burn-off passes just beneath the shaft. Dangerous if it vents wrong, but for now, it's something. A pause, then, you knew that without scanning. I used to build things like this. Systems, interfaces, rescue grids, biofeedback rigs. She turned her head, just slightly. Military. Number civilian science, medtech, trauma-focused. His voice dipped. Until I built one that didn't work, or worked wrong. There was a silence in her eyes. He didn't know how else to describe it, like she was watching him through time, measuring the shape of his guilt without needing the details. How many? She asked. He hesitated. 7 comatose, 2 never woke up. She didn't flinch. She just nodded again, slowly. I didn't curse him, she said suddenly. My mate. That's what they told my house, that I poisoned the bond. But it wasn't me. The dock tether failed. He didn't respond, didn't need to. You believe me, she said. I do. Another silence. Then like a weight shifted, she unfolded her legs and lay on her side, head still angled toward the heat vent. Her hand brushed against his knee in the motion, unintended, brief. He didn't move. She didn't pull away. I'm Cyril, she said into the space between them. Artan let the name settle. It sounded like starlight filtered through mist. Alien, yes, but solid. Real. I'm Artan Vale, he said quietly. Or, I was. She didn't ask what he meant. Instead, she let her eyes close. The pulse beneath her skin dimmed, still visible, but slower now. I don't sleep much, she whispered. Why not? Because I dream, and they always end in silence. He didn't reply. He just shifted a little closer, careful not to touch, but near enough that his body heat could reach her. Then maybe tonight, he said, you'll dream of something else. She didn't answer. But minutes later, her breathing deepened. Her hand relaxed from the death grip she held over the linen cloth. Not gone, not let go, but no longer armor. Arden leaned back against the duct wall, his own eyes closing. They didn't speak again that night, but in the shared quiet of broken things, something between them had begun to mend. Artan woke to the sound of her breathing, slow, measured, steady. Not the trembling gasps she'd had days before, not the restless half-sleep of someone ready to run at every shadow. She was asleep, fully, deeply. Cyril was curled under the emergency wrap, her head tilted slightly toward him, lips parted just enough to catch breath. The faint violet tracings along her cheekbones pulsed gently beneath her skin, glowing like distant starlight under the dim vent light. She didn't stir when he shifted beside her. Something about that trust hit harder than it should have. He didn't move right away. Instead, he stayed still, letting the moment sink into his bones. The warmth of the alcove, the subtle brush of her leg against his in sleep, the way her hand still lightly cradled the cloth bundle. It was all fragile, temporary, and it was more real than anything he'd had in months. They'd survived another night. When she finally opened her eyes, she didn't startle. She blinked slowly, focusing on the ceiling, then on him. Did you sleep? He asked. She nodded. Longer than I meant to. That's good. I didn't dream. There was a pause between them. Not awkward, but full. Arton sat up, rolling his shoulder with a grimace, as a sharp twinge ran through the joint. His body was starting to protest the days of scavenging, sleeping upright, cold air in his lungs. But the pain also made him feel real, present. Cyrilyn leaned forward slightly, running a hand through her long black hair, trying to comb out a stubborn knot. Her fingers caught on something small, metallic, a coin-sized disc tangled near her temple. He frowned. "What's that?" She pulled it free. It was a smooth, reflective medallion, dull silver, marked with a virilei crest etched in spiraling script. One of the older caste identifiers. "A house seal," she said quietly. "From my bonding ceremony." Arton studied it. "You kept it?" "I didn't want to," she said. "But it was woven into my joining braid. I couldn't cut it out without cutting skin." There was no resentment in her voice, only fatigue. "My house cast me out after I was widowed. They said I fractured the bond cycle. My mate's family believed I'd corrupted the pairing when I conceived. They called it a soul dissonance." "That's superstition," Arton said. "It's law. On Virilei, cultural triads are sacred. If one link fails, the structure is considered spiritually compromised, and the fault falls on the surviving member." "And the child?" She looked down. "He was born on a freighter with no med support, malnourished. I tried to keep him warm in a biofoil wrapper. It wasn't enough." She said it plainly, but her hand tightened around the cloth again. "I held him until he stopped moving. Then I kept holding him. No one spoke to me. They just made me leave when we docked." Arton leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. He didn't speak for a while. "I used to think I understood pain," he finally said. "I studied trauma for a living, cross-species neuroempathy, emotional mapping. I could trace neural spikes in grief like topography, measure loss in waveform data." Cyrilyn turned her head toward him, her expression unreadable. "I designed companion rigs, portable empathic modules for crisis care. You could offload memory stress into a digital matrix and recover faster. It worked, mostly. But there was a humanitarian trial, war refugees from the Yaltai border collapse. I deployed the prototype too early. Something in the biosync loop amplified their trauma signals instead of diffusing them. 7 patients dropped into dissociative coma within 2 hours. Her eyes widened slightly. The corp didn't take the blame. I did. Public retraction. License revoked. All grants cut. I stopped working. Stopped building. "Stopped believing in yourself," she said. He looked at her. "Yes." They sat in the silence that followed. But this time it was different. Not empty. Not retreating. Just full. A mutual pause between two people carrying wounds too heavy to name out loud. When the vent pulsed again, sending warm air spiraling up from below, she shifted closer. Just slightly. Their knees brushed again. This time, neither moved. He glanced down and noticed her bare feet, skin raw at the edges, marbled toes chafed from metal grating and cold. "You need boots," he said. She made a soft sound halfway between a laugh and a scoff. "Do I look like someone who has storage? I'm serious. You can't walk long in the ducks without infection." "Do you have boots?" she countered. He smiled faintly. "I know a maintenance cache not far from here. Sometimes the repair crews drop gear there. Nothing clean, but maybe warm." She tilted her head, considering. "I'll come with you." He arched a brow. "You trust me enough for that?" "No," she said, standing, "but I'm tired of staying still." It wasn't a full answer, but it was enough. She took the wrap with her, tucking the cloth bundle into the crook of her elbow. As she stepped forward, she paused beside him. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" She didn't smile, but something in her face softened. Someone who wanted something? Arton stood slowly. He didn't respond because anything he said would have been too small. They walked into the corridor side by side. No longer strangers, not yet partners. But the gap between them, the one filled with silence and grief, was finally narrowing. And for the first time, they were walking in the same direction. The corridor outside the alcove was quieter than it should have been. Even in the forgotten corners of Calderon Hub, There was usually movement, shuffling figures, whispered trades, the whir of drones. But now the air felt unnaturally still, like the station was holding its breath. Artan noticed it first, the shift in pressure, the faint flicker in the duct lights, like a stutter in the hub's pulse. Cyrillene felt it a second later. She paused mid-step, head tilting slightly, eyes narrowing. Her skin's faint bioluminescence dimmed in response, the tracery along her temples retreating like something instinctual, evolutionary, like a flower folding in the dark. "What is that?" she asked. "Not sure," Artan murmured. "Could be a maintenance surge. Or something worse." They moved faster. He led her through the outer tunnels, guiding her past half-collapsed passages and sealed emergency bays. The path to the maintenance cache was always unpredictable. Ducts shifted as repairs and gravity rebalancing altered the structure, but he'd memorized every viable alternate route over weeks of scavenging. Still, something was wrong. By the time they reached the junction corridor, the emergency strobes embedded in the wall panels had begun to flash red in irregular pulses. One of the low-power sirens activated with a stuttering whine, sharp and teeth-clenching. A breach alarm. Artan froze. Cyrillene instinctively stepped back, her hand flying to the cloth wrap she carried. "Sector 7?" he said, squinting at the blinking terminal. "That's too close." "How bad?" she asked. "If it's a depressurization vent, bad. If it's a fusion pipe crack, lethal." Before he could finish the sentence, the floor shuddered beneath them. Just once. A subtle, sickening vibration. Not enough to throw them off balance, but enough to raise every hair on his arms. Emergency shutters slammed down at the far end of the corridor, followed by a burst of frigid air that hissed through the gaps. The temperature dropped instantly. "Move!" he barked, grabbing her arm, not forcefully, but urgently. She flinched but didn't pull away. They ran. Together. The maintenance cache was down a side hall past a pair of sealed security doors. One of them was half jammed open. Artan yanked at the panel and ducked through. Cyrillene followed, her wrap catching on the edge of the frame before she pulled it free. Inside, the lights flickered, but the vent system still hummed. The room was tight, cluttered with old parts, discarded uniforms, tool racks. He slammed the manual override on the hatch and sealed them in. For a moment, the sound of chaos outside muted. They stood in the dim light, panting, their breath visible in the chilled air. Cyrillene leaned against the far wall, her body trembling, not from cold now, but from adrenaline. "Are we safe?" she asked. "For now," he said. "This section was hardened after the last fire. If the breach spreads, this is one of the few places that can hold." She didn't answer. Her hand went to her chest, clutching the wrap again, but her eyes were on him. "I hate that feeling," she said quietly. "What feeling?" "The moment you realize everything might collapse, and all you can do is run." He sat down slowly, back against a storage crate. "Yeah, I know that one." Cyrillene sank down across from him. Her body had stopped shaking, but her shoulders were still tight. "I thought I'd learned to stop caring," she said after a moment. "That if I didn't expect anything to last, I wouldn't feel afraid when it ended." Artan looked at her, really looked. Her eyes held no defiance, no guarded walls, just the exhaustion of someone who'd run out of strategies. "But then you ran too," she added, "and I hated that it mattered." She didn't speak for a long time after that. The emergency lights dimmed. Outside, the sounds had quieted, but not disappeared. The threat hadn't passed, only moved. Artan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I was married once," he said. "Before Delvin, before the neural rig disaster. She was a systems tech, smarter than me, brave enough to tell me when I was wrong. She used to say I was too good at pretending nothing touched me." "What happened?" "She died in a docking collapse. Transport shielding failed. I wasn't there. I was presenting some lecture on cross-species empathy to a room full of bureaucrats who didn't give a damn. When I got back, there wasn't even a body." Cyrilline's voice was soft. "And you never left the station?" "Number one left everything else. Just not the guilt." Their eyes met. There was a weight between them now. Not just grief, not just shared loss, but recognition. A slow, painful alignment of two people who'd been walking alone for too long. She stood and crossed the space between them. Not abruptly, Not with drama, just with quiet decision. And then, without asking, without hesitating, she knelt beside him and rested her forehead gently against his shoulder. He didn't move. His body tensed just for a breath, then slowly softened. He exhaled, and in that moment, he understood that neither of them was trying to save the other. They were simply trying not to fall alone. Her hand came to rest over his, cautious but steady. Her skin was cooler than his, rough from exposure, yet impossibly gentle. His thumb shifted, just barely, tracing the line of her wrist, not as possession, but as presence. When she finally lifted her head, her face was close, closer than they'd ever been. Her voice was quiet, steady. "I don't know what this is. I just know I feel warmer when I'm near you." He didn't try to answer. Instead, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't perfect. It was real. And when it broke, when her forehead rested against his again, her breath warm against his mouth, neither of them said a word. They didn't have to. In the silence, something had broken open between them, not like a wound, but like light finding its way through fractured steel. For the first time, they weren't just surviving. They were beginning to choose each other. The hours after the breach blurred, the chaos had receded like a wave, leaving behind a quiet that didn't feel like safety, just silence, heavy and waiting. The warning klaxons had faded, the temperature stabilized, but neither Artan nor Siralin trusted the calm. They returned to the alcove slowly, with their backs to the wall and their ears tuned to the sublevel's shifting breath. The corridor felt emptier than before, not cleaner, just more hollow, like a space where something had been torn away. By the time they reached the alcove, the warmth of the vent was already fading. Sira knelt beside the wall, fingers splayed across the metal surface as if searching for a pulse. Artan stood over her, watching the dull gleam of her violet-marked skin in the failing light. "You're limping again," she said without looking up. Orton didn't deny it. The cut on his leg, the one he'd ignored, was flaring now with fever heat. The infection had begun to spread, subtle but certain. He shifted his weight, trying to mask it, but Sira had already turned her eyes toward him. "You need antibiotics," she said. "They don't exactly fall out of the sky." "No," she murmured, "but they fall out of smuggler caches." He blinked. "What?" She stood, her posture deliberate. "There's a spot, 3 ducts down, near the emergency cargo loop. I saw a storage node there days ago. Old maintenance crew dumped gear through a collapsed shaft. We may still find something usable." He hesitated. "You can't run from infection," she added, not unkindly. So they went. The crawl through the duct was slow, narrow, sharp-angled, laced with tangled conduit. At one point, Artan had to stop, teeth gritted against the burn in his thigh. Sira didn't push him to move faster. She simply waited, her hand resting lightly on his shoulders until he nodded again. They found the cache where she'd said it would be, an old stasis locker half covered in crushed plating, half eaten by rust. But inside, "Med pack," Sira breathed. "Still sealed." Artan reached in, pulled it free, and cracked the casing. Sterile bandage wraps, 2 doses of basic nutrients, and, yes, he held it up, broad-spectrum antibiotic. His fingers shook as he loaded the dose. He hesitated with the injector. Sira stepped closer. "Give it to me." He handed it over without protest. She knelt in front of him, gently pulling back the torn fabric over his leg. The skin was swollen, red. The cut had darkened at the edges. Sira's expression didn't change. She pressed the injector to the muscle and released the dose. The hiss was barely audible. When it was done, she didn't move back. Her fingers lingered near the raw skin, not clinically, but gently, deliberately. "You should have told me sooner," she said. Artan's voice was quiet. "Didn't want to slow us down." "You think I care more about the plan than your life?" He looked at her then. "No," he said, "but I think I care more about yours." She didn't answer right away, just rested her hand on his knee. Her touch was steady, present. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Artan," she said softly. "Not anymore." Back in the alcove, night had returned, or what passed for night in the sublevels. The lights dimmed, and the hum of the station dulled. The air was a fraction warmer than usual, and for once the silence didn't feel dangerous. Arton lay back, body still aching, but his breathing was easier. The fever had started to break. Sierra sat beside him, legs drawn in, arms resting on her knees. She was watching him. "You're going to be okay," she said. "I believe you." She leaned against the wall, and he shifted so that their shoulders touched. The contact was brief, simple, but it wasn't accidental. "I was thinking," she said after a while, her voice almost a whisper, "about what comes next." "You mean after the next vent cycle and another half ration?" "No," she said, turning her head. "I mean after this station, after all of it." Arton stayed quiet. She continued, "I don't want to drift anymore. I don't want to survive just because I don't know how to stop." He turned to face her fully. "Do you want to leave with me? I wouldn't have kissed you if I didn't." The moment settled between them, soft, certain, alive. Then she moved closer, not urgently, but without pause. She slid down beside him, curling into the space his body had left open. Her head rested just beneath his chin. Her fingers trailed along his forearm, finding his hand and threading through it. Arton held her there, pulling her against his chest with the ease of someone who had finally stopped resisting what he needed. "You still cold?" he asked. "No," she said, pressing a kiss to the curve of his throat. "Not anymore." He tilted her chin up and kissed her again, this time deeper, slower, not just a promise, but a choice. Her breath caught as his hand moved to her back, drawing her closer. She responded not with hesitation, but with trust. Earned, hard-fought, real. Their bodies met in quiet synchronicity. No rush, no fear, only warmth, only belonging. When they slept that night, they did not sleep apart. And when they woke, it would be to something new, something chosen, not out of desperation, but out of love. The hauler was old, patched together with layers of scorched plating and repurposed modules, but its engines still held the growl of something meant to leave. Sierralin stood in the open airlock, the emergency wrap reconfigured as a makeshift hooded shawl, her hand resting on the bulkhead. Arton worked at the exposed nav controls beneath the hauler's underbelly, face lit by the pale flicker of a hacked access tablet. His hands moved steadily, but the sweat on his brow wasn't from heat. It was tension. "You said this would work," she murmured. He didn't look up. "I said it might work." A pause, then she said, "That's the most honest thing you've said since I met you." He gave a short huff of breath, almost a laugh. "That can't be true." "It is." Another beat of silence. Then the control panel beeped. A green pulse strobed once across the screen. "Override accepted," he said. "Launch path registered. We're in." Sierra didn't move yet. "What happens if they flag the hauler before it clears the shield net?" Arton met her eyes now. "Then we don't make it." Sierra studied him. Not just his face, but everything behind it. The fatigue, the stubbornness, the scar tissue of someone who'd stopped believing he deserved survival until her shivering body made him remember otherwise. She nodded once. "Then let's go." The hatch sealed behind them with a shudder. The interior of the drone hauler was nothing like a passenger ship. There were no seats, no harnesses, no windows. Just a narrow walkway along the center line, crates secured in vibration locks, and the smell of scorched plastic and recycled lubricant. Arton braced himself near the access node and guided Sierra to a space near the rear wall, where the inertial drift would be weakest. "This isn't going to be smooth," he said. "Nothing's been smooth," she replied, curling beside a crate and pulling the wrap tighter around herself. "We'll manage." The lights flickered. The engines spun up, quiet at first, then growing into a low, vibrating roar beneath their feet. The launch clamps disengaged. They were moving. Neither of them spoke as Calderon Hub shrank behind them, swallowed by darkness and distance. There was no viewport to watch it go, but both of them felt it, like something exhaled behind their ribs. The station that had nearly buried them was gone. Sierra let her eyes close for a moment, just long enough to breathe through the shift in gravity. Then she whispered, "I haven't felt motion like this since I was exiled." Arton turned toward her. "You okay?" "I don't know what I am yet," she said, "but I know this. This feels real." A pause. "There's something else." she added, quieter now. Something I should have said sooner. Arton sat beside her. What is it? She reached for his hand, held it. I'm pregnant. It was simple, plain. No dramatic hesitation, no trembling voice. But her grip tightened slightly, just enough to betray how hard it had been to say. He stared at her for a long moment, not in fear, not in shock, but with the focus of someone rewiring the shape of his future in real time. How long have you known? He asked. A few cycles. I wasn't sure at first. Then I was, and I didn't know if I'd still be alive by now. He let that sit. Then, I'm glad you are. Her eyes flicked up. You don't have to pretend. I know what this means. So do I, he said. It means we have something to protect. She looked at him then, not just at his face, but into it, into him. And what she saw must have been enough because she leaned into his side, resting her head against his shoulder. He brought his arm around her slowly, cradling her as if she were made of light and breath, and everything fragile he hadn't believed he'd ever hold again. They sat like that through the launch curve, their bodies swaying with the inertial drag as the hauler broke from orbit. Artan's breathing had slowed. Hers had aligned with his. I used to dream of something like this, she said softly. A baby? He asked. No, she said, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. A reason. He rested his forehead lightly against hers. Then maybe we both found one. The silence that followed wasn't silence. It was full of motion, of acceleration, of hearts learning to beat again without fear. Later, when the nav system stabilized and the hauler settled into cruise drift, Sierra lay back against a crate and reached for Artan's hand again. He laced his fingers through hers without a word. I think, she said, I could learn to be happy. Artan shifted beside her, eyes closed. You don't have to learn alone. She moved to him then, pressing her mouth to his, slow, steady, and without question. The kiss was not desperate. It was grounding, anchored. Their hands moved with care, exploring new spaces they hadn't yet touched, not as survival, but as intimacy earned. When their clothes loosened and the space between their bodies finally dissolved, it wasn't frantic. It was reverent. Her legs wrapped around his hips, her breath soft against his neck. He held her as if the void beyond the walls couldn't touch them, and in that moment it didn't. There was no world left but the one they were building, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. When it was over, they lay tangled in each other, their bodies slick with shared heat in a ship not meant for life. But they were alive, together. Sierra whispered, This child won't be born in cold. Artan kissed her hair, slow and deliberate. No, he said, they'll be born into something we chose. They didn't fall asleep right away. They stayed awake, just to feel the motion of the stars around them. Just to know it was real. Behind them was ruin. Ahead, possibility, not perfect, not easy, but theirs. The planet was quiet. It had no name worth remembering, just a registration code used by traders, LVX-93. But to Artan and Cyrillenne, it had become something else entirely, sanctuary. The air was dense with the smell of blooming iron root and cool mineral winds. The horizon stretched in muted violet gold bands, as if the sky couldn't decide whether to rest or rise. A dome hab curved like a pearl against a jagged line of hills, its climate shield softly humming, wrapped in a field of bioluminescent moss that shimmered beneath the dusklight. Inside the dome, warmth lived. Sierra lay in a nest of hand-stitched thermal blankets and memory foam bedding, her skin slick with effort, her chest rising in fast, rhythmic gasps. Her hair, longer now, clung to her cheeks in wet strands. She was exhausted, but not in danger. No fear in her eyes, just awe. Artan knelt beside her, knees pressed to the padded flooring, his fingers still curled around her hand. His other arm cradled something so impossibly small, so impossibly alive, that he hadn't yet found words for it. The baby. Their baby. She was wrapped in the same cloth Cyrillenne had once clung to during her exile on Calderon Hub. Clean now, softened by months of washing and folded a dozen times until it felt more like memory than fabric. And inside it, a heartbeat, a weight, a future. Sierra turned her face toward him. Her lips were parted, breathless, trembling not from pain now, but from something else entirely. "Let me see him," she whispered. Artan smiled. "Her." She blinked. The corner of her mouth twitched. "Her?" He nodded. "Definitely her." He leaned forward carefully, reverently, and placed the bundle into her arms. Sierra held her daughter with both hands, as if the child were made of light and starlight. Her skin was a muted jade green, more like Sierra Len's than his. But her eyes, when they opened, were unmistakably Artan's, pale gray blue, steady even in confusion. The baby blinked slowly and made a soft, raspy chirp, half breath, half instinct. Sierra let out a noise then, something small and breaking, a sound too soft to be a sob, too deep to be a laugh. She kissed the baby's head, lips brushing over the fine dark strands that had already begun to grow. Artan reached for her shoulder, grounding them both. "You did it." "No," she murmured. "We did." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. She turned her face toward him, and they kissed properly, mouths meeting with the slow, fierce tenderness of two people who had earned this moment with blood and silence and everything between. Outside the dome, the wind stirred the trees, but it couldn't reach them. Inside, time slowed. Artan sat beside her on the floor, one arm around her back, the other around both mother and child. The heater ticked quietly in the background. A faint song played from the wall unit, a terrestrial lullaby stored in an old Earth archive, something about rivers and home. "She'll need a name," he said after a long while. Sierra's fingers stroked the baby's cheek. "I was thinking of Lenari. It was my sister's middle name. She died before the trials." Artan tested the name aloud. "Lenari Vale." Sierra looked at him. "Vale?" He hesitated. "If you want it." She smiled. "I do." The baby shifted in her arms, gave a tiny hiccup, then fell still again, sleeping as if nothing had ever hurt the world. Sierra leaned against Artan's shoulder, eyes fluttering closed. "I used to wonder if healing was just something people told each other, a story to survive the waiting." "And now?" he asked. She turned her head toward him. "Now I believe in it." That night, while the world turned slowly beneath them, while the stars wandered above the dome and the wind sang to no one, Artan watched the two most precious lives he'd ever known breathe in rhythm, tangled together in peace. He didn't need anything else. They were warm, safe, real, and the cold would never touch them again.